Hello, everybody, and welcome to this 58th episode of the Writ Podcast. The Quebec election has started, and the polls are starting to come in. The buses are going around the province, so who better to speak with than Philippe J. Fournier of 338canada.com and QC125.com. He'll be joining us throughout the campaign, but after this week, there'll be subscriber-only episodes. So if you're listening to this, you will have to be a subscriber to the Writ.ca to listen to our chats every week. And if you're watching this, if you want to listen to the podcast, you'll have to also subscribe. But we're going to be chatting about all of the numbers that are going to be coming in throughout the campaign. And today we're just going to do a bit of a setup of where things stand after the first week. Philippe, how are you doing so far? I'm sure it's been a busy week.
Hi, Eric. It's good to see you. Yes, it's been an insanely busy week. There's something that perhaps Canadians outside of Quebec do not realize is that how much Quebecers care about their provincial politics. It's a far bigger deal than the federal elections. So yes, I've been doing my media rounds. I have maybe 100 emails a day about questions. So it's very busy, but so far it's going well. Thanks.
Yeah, you need an assistant, I think. Yeah, I wish that
He's right here.
I wish that.
He's right.
Yeah, you're a cat. I wish that sometimes the other provinces in the country had as much excitement about their provincial elections as in Quebec. We didn't see that in Ontario just a few months ago. So no,
we really didn't. I mean, 43.5 turnout rate. I think it was in Ontario. The lowest in Quebec was 58% in 2008, and there was a massive snowstorm the day before. It was a December election. So usually our elections have a higher 60s and 70s turnout rate. So hopefully it stays up, but we'll have to wait and see.
Well, actually, that brings me up a question here. In Ontario, one of the reasons I think the turnout was pretty low was that everybody kind of just assumed Doug Ford and the PCs were going to win. In this election, everybody seems to kind of assume that's going to be the CEQ and François Legault that wins. Do you think that's going to lower the turnout?
I do not know. That's the thing. I can see many scenarios unfold, but there's one thing that's dramatically different here. We have 5 parties, one upstart in the Conservatives, and the 2 traditional parties that have ruled Quebec for the past 50 years outside the CEQ, of course, the Liberals and the Parti Québécois. They're fighting for their lives. And so even though, yes, all the polling shows that the CEQ should win rather easily, there are very dramatically different scenarios that could unfold after the election. I mean, if Éric Duhaime and the Conservatives are shut out of the National Assembly, or if they win 3 or 4 seats, it's a dramatically different scenario for 2026, for instance. If the Parti Québécois is wiped out, or if the Parti Québécois manages to survive this election and weather the storm, same thing for the Liberals if they're shut out from Quebec. So yeah, the state of the opposition parties really is in play, and we could have a very different Quebec politics for the next 10 years. Whereas in Ontario, I don't know, Liberals and DP, who cares? I don't want to insult anybody in Ontario, but that was a snooze fest. But yeah, it's not their fault. It's not the people of Ontario's fault, of course. It's the the politicians. But yeah,
yeah, of course, blame them. Okay, so the campaign started on Sunday, so we've already been a week into it. Now we're recording on Thursday morning, so if anything happens during the day on Thursday, we won't obviously have a chance to talk about it. But is there anything that you've seen over this first week that kind of encapsulates what this election is?
I think it's too early to tell. However, because, these summer elections, I think people really start paying attention once Labor Day is out. So far, I think they're just practicing. But 2 things I would say. First, we see the effects of aging population in Quebec, because right now, what are we talking about? We're talking about tax cuts. We're talking about healthcare, and that's it. We're not talking about the environment. Québec Solidaire is trying really hard to change the narrative. But so apparently these massive tax cuts, we're talking about billions of dollars of tax cuts that they're promising, because, of course, all of our problems in schools and hospitals are solved now. So we have too much money, so we should give them back. And also to fight inflation, it's always a good idea, and I'm being sarcastic here, to inject liquidity in the population. So it's been a rough first few days. Perhaps I'm not the target demographic, of course, but so far I think they're vying for the suburban and regions vote. We see François Legault right now, yesterday and today, he's in Beauce. That means he's playing defense against Éric Duhaime. So far, this is what I've seen in the first week.
I do find it interesting that some of the regions that seem to be the most interesting to watch are places that you don't always see a lot of attention, like the Beauce. The Beauce would usually not be a place that you would spend a lot of time in. It's a pretty solidly CEQ before that, ADQ, maybe the Liberals. And also, in the Gaspésie, there's a lot of people having to spend some time out there, which takes a lot of time out of the campaign because it's not easy to get to. But the PQ is trying to defend all of its seats, right? So it is kind of spreading out the map a little bit more than it's not just, the 450 and the Eastern Townships and like it always is in election campaigns.
That's right. The 450, the 450, for those who don't know, these are the suburbs of Montreal, a bit similar to the 905 around Toronto. The thing is, there are 33 seats in total. The CAQ should win maybe 31. So that's settled. I don't want to say it can't change, of course, during the campaign, but in 2018, Eric, as you know, the CAQ hit a wall at the limits of Rimouski and all the way down to St. Lawrence and the Gaspésie. This was PQ territory. And we saw the Premier, Legault, go there this spring very often. And he will go there again during the campaign because he really wants those seats. And perhaps if the PQ cannot defend this territory, they'll be done, basically. They'll have one seat in Matane-Matapédia, Pascal Bérubé. And I don't know how you get back up from this. But, yeah.
Let's talk about some of the polls that we have seen. Now, there's only been 2 polling firms out so far. I am wondering, I'm not sure if you've spoken to anybody, but whether we're going to see a lot more, because it feels like, there used to be CROP that would put out polls during Quebec election campaigns. They seem to have no longer interest in putting out provincial kind of politics polls. So it feels like Léger has been left the field a little bit. And there might be some... Maybe we'll see an Ipsos, a poll here or there, but all we've had so far is Léger and Main Street, which is putting out a daily tracker. Do you have any idea if we're going to see a lot more polling? I mean, it's also not an interesting campaign in the sense of polls, right? Unless some trends develop.
That's the thing, though. I think there are many storylines that are worth following, but we have to remember that the polling firms, when they poll during elections, this is a net loss for them because the media corporations don't have the money to pay full price. So I can understand. It's entirely legitimate for, let's say, Ipsos or another firm to say, we don't want to spend tens of thousands of dollars on polling because we know who's going to win. I think this is maybe a bit short-sighted. Yeah, the CQ is going to win, but there's a huge difference if the Liberals survive or not, or if the Parti Conservateur, gets seats or not. But from what I've heard so far, we're going to have very few polls. Léger should put one maybe in the middle of the campaign, one at the end. Additionally to the one they put out last weekend. The Main Street tracker is there. However, it had a rocky start. The numbers look really weird. Of course, they can adjust along the way, but the fact that a CAQ is so dominant could make this a bit more boring polling-wise. I hope not, obviously, because, again, I think there are many interesting storylines. But I haven't seen Cup in a while. Ecos, maybe Anger Street Institute. Sometimes they do 1 or 2 during the campaign. We'll wait and see.
Yeah. So we have seen those 2 polls. So Main Street is doing a daily tracker. So the one that I'm looking at is the one they put out on Wednesday afternoon. So They'll probably put out another one on Thursday afternoon. So they had 41 for the CAQ, 18 for the Liberals, 18 for the Conservatives, 12 for the Québec Solidaire, 7 for the Parti Québécois. Léger, the one that they put out just before the election, had 42 for the CAQ, 17 for the Liberals, 15 for Québec Solidaire, 14 for the Conservatives, 9 for the Parti Québécois. So not a huge amount of difference between these 2 now. And when you see that the opposition is just split 4 ways, in Ontario, there was that potential for if all of the NDP vote got behind the Liberals or if all the Liberal vote got behind the NDP. But here, there's not going to be the Parti Québécois is going to give votes to the Liberals or the Conservatives are going to give vote for the Québec Solidaire. There's no chance for that one vehicle, that one anti-CAQ vehicle to emerge from this, it seems to me.
You are correct. I mean, even though the Ontario Liberals and Ontario NDP are different parties, please don't jump on me, but they are connected some way. The voters sometimes go from one to the other, right? There is a channel there. There are very few channels between those parties in Quebec. I mean, Québec Solidaire has eaten up the left wing of Parti Québécois in the past 15 years. That's not reversible, I think. And the Parti Conservateur, Thing is, Éric Duhem is not himself, a conspirationist or, but he attracts a lot of those people. They're anti-system. They're really angry at the government and CAQ and François Legault, and we do not see that much anger from the other parties. There's, of course, they want to beat the CAQ, but when we see the polls, we looked at the Péquistes and the Liberals. They're not completely dissatisfied with François Legault. So I don't think there's a channel between the Conservatives and the other parties. So they are closed bubbles. And that's why it's so... I mean, the CAQ could get between 40 and 45%. That still leaves a majority of Quebec voters not voting CAQ. But they can't agree on how to beat the CAQ. So this is a recipe for a massive seat victory, as you know.
Yeah. And if you, the Main Street poll had some breakdowns between the island of Montreal and the suburbs of Montreal. So in the Leger polls, CQ's ahead by 20, 30 points in Quebec City. They're ahead by 20, 30 points in the rest of Quebec. And they're ahead by about, I can't remember what it was, but 7 points.
7 points. Yeah,
in and around Montreal. But when you see the Main Street numbers, which are similar in terms of the greater Montreal, you did have the Liberals actually a teeny little bit ahead on the island of Montreal. Now, a lot of that's in the West Island. But in the suburbs, there again, you had a huge lead for the CAQ. So it does seem like, aside from a few individual ridings, like in Eastern Quebec, in Quebec City, and in parts of Montreal, it's really hard to see how anybody else is winning more than an individual seat that is a surprise or something like that.
We would have to see a major misstep, a screw-up from Legault and his team. We would have to see something major to veer this campaign around. Because it's not only that he's leading, it's that he's been leading for 4 years. And I'll ask you this, Eric, because you've followed polling for longer than I did, but when has a government led in every single poll during an entire 4-year term? I can't remember many of them. In Quebec, there was none. Since polling in Quebec, it's been implemented on a regular basis. Never a party has led every single poll for 4 years. And I'm guessing it hasn't happened that often.
No, unless you're talking about, Alberta with the PCs before, that kind of thing. But federally, the Liberals were leading after the 2015 election and then lost that lead ahead of the 2019 election, right, in the summer just before. So it's true. It is pretty rare, and especially not that they're just ahead by 2 or 3 points. I can't recall what the closest margin one was in any poll over the last 4 years. I'm sure it was still double digits, right?
Because it was. Yeah,
they've been so far ahead. One of the questions that I've been getting from people is about whether, Quebec Solidaire, the Conservatives, could make enough of a breakthrough that it's someone else who wins the opposition. But the Liberals, they've had a bit of a rough start to the campaign with finding candidates dropping out, candidate vacancies they still haven't filled. Their campaign has just been, it seems like they've gone off to a bad start, had weather delays in terms of being able to get around to where they wanted to go. Yeah. It hasn't been a good start for them, but their floor is still really high, right?
Yeah, it's not as high as it used to be. I think in last December, you and I did a little game of over and under, and I think I said the Liberals cannot go below 20 seats, and now I wonder if they can get above 20 seats. So that floor is still high. I mean, if those numbers stay, we should still see the Liberals in the official opposition status. However, that's going to please the CAQ. It will be mostly non-Francophones Quebecers that will be represented by the Liberals. And so the CAQ will be able to say, see, we are the true Quebecers and they are the Anglos against us. And I know I'm paraphrasing, but the fact that the Liberals have single-digit support among Francophones, I mean, let's remember, there was always this non-Francophone support for the Liberals. But Jean Charest and Philippe Couillard won the Francophone vote in their tenure. So the fact that the Liberals are so low right now from Francophones, it creates huge problems because they will be labeled as the Anglo Party, and that's not something that the Liberals want, of course, in their rebuilding.
Do they have any chances outside of Pontiac and the Outaouais and the ridings on the island of Montreal? Do they have any prospects east of the downtown of Montreal?
No, they don't. They don't. I mean, I toured the parties this summer. I talked to the organization and the strategist of every party in Quebec, including the Liberals. And it was an off-the-record conversation, so I'm not going to reveal what I learned, but it was really interesting to see that the Liberals still believe that they will get back to, not winning, of course, but respectability. And so far, during the summer, those numbers have gotten worse. And I don't know. I mean, Madame Anglade, Dominique Anglade, the Liberal leader, is very feisty. She is fighting for it. She's not giving up. It's just that there doesn't seem to be any connection between her and Francophone Quebec, at least according to the polls. But outside of Montreal and let's say Brossard and one seat in Laval, so this is the greater Montreal still. Outside of this, they won 2 seats outside of Montreal in Outaouais in 2018, and they've gone down since. And they lost both of those seats. Robertval and Jean Talon, as you know, were lost to the CAQ in by-elections. There's no indication that those seats are coming back. They did a really good performance in Gaspé. I think they lost by 40 votes. But then again, there's no data available that shows that the Liberals could be back this election. So maybe a strong debate, maybe a few screw-ups from François Legault. It has to be a perfect storm for this ship to turn around.
So if their floor is still in the mid to high teens, let's say, in terms of seats, because there is a minimum, right, for them. It's not that they can drop below 10 just because of how well they do among the Anglophone population. A party like Quebec Solidaire, do they have any prospects of finishing second in the seats?
It's not impossible. It's not the most plausible scenario, but it's not impossible. I mean, Québec Solidaire still has, opposite to the Liberals, Québec Solidaire also has a strong floor. They won't lose many of those seats, if any at all. But the ceiling is low. They could have good performances, let's say in Saint-François, which is in the Eastern Townships, or even in Rimouski down the St. Lawrence. But a good performance of 22%, maybe 25% of the votes still doesn't give you a win. It doesn't give you a seat. And so I think the absolute ceiling that I have for Québec Solidaire is 16 seats. So is that enough to win official opposition? If the Liberals really do crash and burn, yeah, it's possible. But it's really not the most plausible scenario. However, Eric, you know as well as I do that the campaigns usually change the numbers. And in 2018, Québec Solidaire started the campaign at 10% and finished at 16%. And now they're starting at 15 or 16. So let's say Gabriel Dubois really outperforms during the debate and does well. Let's say they get 20%. Now it's getting interesting. Now they could cause surprises like they did in Rouyn-Noranda 4 years ago. And so, but still, they're not winning 30 seats. That's not possible.
And if they are getting into the mid to high teens, some of those seats are going to come from the Liberals, right? Because they are taking some of the seats on the island of Montreal. So there could be a bit of a transference there. But they do also have to take some CAQ seats, right? Because they're probably, aside from Rimouski, they don't really have a huge prospect of picking up seats from the PQ. And so that means they got to go through the CAQ, right? So that's not going to be easy.
It's not going to be easy, and I refer this to, hockey analogy. I know you like those. Hockey analogy. Mario Lemieux scores 160 points. Yeah, great, but you have Gretzky doing 180. Even if Quebec Solidaire is doing better in this election, the CAQ has such a massive, massive support from Francophones, above 50% in many polls. And also, when you do, as well as I do, the age breakdown matters a lot. The CAQ is dominating the 55 or 65 and over, depending on the polls. And that, again, you mentioned the turnout earlier. If the turnout is lower than usual, that usually means that young voters did not go and vote en masse. And if that happens, Québec Solidaire has no chance of making any gains. They have to get those young voters out in campuses throughout the province to hope to make any gains, because the CAQ voters, the older guard, they will go and vote. That's for sure. When you have over 50% or 55% support among the older demographic, that's really hard to beat if you're an opposition party.
How about the Conservatives? Now, for them to win multiple seats is not going to be easy for them. Looking at the last set of polling, they're doing quite well in the Quebec City area, 25%, around there. But the CAQ is still at 45, 50%, more or less holding the vote that they had last time. So the CQ needs the Conservatives needs the CQ vote to come down, but it isn't coming down. So, well, first of all, where are those Conservatives coming from? Because if the CQ is holding the vote, I guess the CQ is taking from some of the other parties. But aside from winning Chauveau, the riding where Éric Duhaime is running, he'll have a lot of profile. He'll be in the debate, so he might get a bit of a boost just at the local level. But beyond that, what pushes them over the edge to win a second seat, a third seat?
There are a few sleepers. Right now, as you said, the Conservatives are poised to collect second place finishes in the Quebec City area, not the downtown core, but the suburbs of Quebec City, and of course the east shore, where Lévis and Chaude-la-Chaudière, and then if you go down the Highway 73, you get to Beauce. The Parti conservateur will do well there. But let's say the Beauce Nord and Beauce Sud, the two Beauces, the CEQ had over 60% of the vote last time. So you would need a major stumble for the CEQ to lose those seats. And also, the fact that the Liberals and the Parti Québécois are just so unpopular in those regions. So you cannot have a vote split. Last election, Eric, we had a few seats in and around Montreal where 28 or 29% of the vote got you to win. But that's not going to be the case this time. Éric Duhaime and his candidate in Beauce could get 40% of the vote and still lose. So, Éric Duhaime almost needs the Liberals and the Parti Québécois to go up a little bit to split the vote so he can win those seats. There's also, I think, for instance, that the CEQ still is leading in Lévis with Bernard Drainville as a star candidate. But it's also possible that the fact that Bernard Drainville is a former PQ cabinet minister plays against him. The Parti Québécois has not been popular in that region of Quebec for decades. And so some will say, some maybe who voted CEQ 4 years ago, they say, I don't want to vote for a Péquiste. That's possible, and they would go to the Conservatives, which are second. We could have a few surprises like this. But still, again, we're talking hypotheticals. The most likely scenario is perhaps Chauveau, and that's it.
We'll have to see if we get any more detailed polling. You talked about how there are some great storylines, and if there was some polling done in certain regions of the province, then we might get a better picture of what's going on, right? Because, you had Duhaime, he was up in the Saguenay area, he was talking about the GNL project there. Not exactly a place where you would expect the Conservatives to do well. The federal Conservatives have won seats in the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean before, so maybe there could be some transference there, but it would be interesting to know if they do have any support in specific pockets of the province that are beyond just the Quebec City region.
I think the Conservatives also, they will tour around Quebec City. And if, for those who don't know, if the Saguenay is a long way from Montreal, but if you're in Quebec City, it's a 2-hour drive around the highway that gets you there. And so he will go to Mauricie, he will go a bit down to St. Lawrence, he will go, and so he's going to circle Quebec City area for the campaign. He's not, if he comes to Montreal for more than a few days, I think those are wasted campaign days because he's not going to elect anybody in Montreal. But yeah, the Saguenay is part of the greater conservative bubble that they hope to get. They're not going to win seats there, but Éric Duhaime says publicly, I'm here for the long haul. After this election, if my party does well, that means more funding, that means more visibility, and 2026, I will be there. So he's already thinking about the next campaign. That's why he's going to those places.
Parti Québécois hopes that they can have another campaign, after this one. So 9%, 7%. And even when you look at the regional numbers, in the Main Street in Léger, in the rest of Quebec, which includes everything from Abitibi-Témiscamingue all the way to the Gaspésie, but you did have the PQ still at very low numbers. It doesn't seem like they have any region that has particular strength. Now, they might have some strength in the Gaspésie, in the Bas-Saint-Laurent, but we don't really know that because we haven't seen any numbers unless you've seen something, Philippe, but they could be in a lot of trouble because at 7%, that means they lost half their vote.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you lose half your vote and if you want a seat with 40%, you're not going to win that seat anymore.
No. Exactly. I mean, you would need major local effects. The example that I mentioned earlier, Rimouski. Rimouski was one of the ridings where the local candidate did a tremendous difference because it did not follow national trends or provincial trends in 2018. The PQ actually increased its vote in Rimouski, whereas nationally, well, they went from 25 to 17%. That's a huge chunk. But that candidate is not there anymore. He's not running anymore. And so you have a bunch of new candidates that are mostly unknown to the public. They are known locally, of course, but you know as well as I do that local candidates that make a huge difference in their riding, they can overperform their party. Those exist, but there are the exceptions. There's a handful of them each election. There's not 20 of them. So the Parti Québécois better hope that their local candidates can make a huge difference because so far, you know, God bless his soul, Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon is touring Quebec with a lot of energy. It must be really demoralizing to see all those numbers. I know I wrote a tweet that got a lot of Parti Québécois angry at me. When the Léger came out, it was 9%, and I said, oh, that's catastrophic. And some answers that I got is like, yeah, well, it was 9 or 10 in the spring. Why is it catastrophic? It's like, yeah, because nothing's changed, and we're closer and closer to the election. And so, you know, we're late in the third period, and you're still down 6-0. So nothing happened. I mean, Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon chose Bourget, now called Camille Lorrain. It's a riding that the PQ used to win easily in the eastern side of Montreal. It lost it in 2018 to the CAQ. There's no indicator. There's no local polling, regional polling, national polling that says that he couldn't win it back. And so it's going to be really hard for him to keep a smile on his face for the whole campaign. I mean, again, God bless his soul, he's doing with a lot of energy and optimism, but those numbers has to be crushing. It has to get to you at some point. That's why I don't do politics, because it would piss me off too much.
Well, in 2018, Jean-François Lisée wasn't able to win a seat, and he was running in Rosemont, was he not?
Yeah, he was. Rosemont, my riding where I live, and he did not get a boost. He did not get a leader's boost. Nope.
And you could argue that he had a much higher profile than Saint-Pierre Plamondon. He had more of a track record. So if he couldn't win the seat at a time when the PQ was doing a little bit better, you got to think that Saint-Pierre Plamondon has some. His future might not be very long in the PQ, though. I mean, if they get crushed again in an election, you know, maybe he'll stick around. He has been around for a while since he ran for the leadership before, but where can they get any votes?
He has to hope that Québec Solidaire stumbles. The thing is that then again, the channel between voters of Québec Solidaire and the Parti Québécois, I mean, these people dislike each other very much. So Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois will not lose many points in this election. If not, he probably will gain some. He has to get sovereigntists on board. I mean, that's the thing. We had 2 polls in June about sovereignty. We don't get those very often anymore because it's not on the table. But the 2 polls basically said roughly the same thing. About 30% of Quebecers still identify as sovereigntists, and the PQ is at 9%. So what does that tell you? That tells you that many sovereigntists do not believe that the Parti Québécois is the vessel that will lead them to independence. If he does a campaign focused on independence, it will antagonize a lot of people in Quebec, but at least perhaps it will bring back those sovereigntists, les brebis égarées, into his fold, and that's what he has to hope to. Where could he get votes? I mean, again, the CAQ would have to stumble a lot. And so far, I mean, François Legault can stumble. We know he's able to, but we haven't seen major missteps so far.
We'll finish on this then. For the CAQ, you know, there are those kind of intangibles of just kind of screwing up during the course of the campaign. But is there anything right now that they could or should be nervous about, as they're heading into the last month?
That's a good question. Well, I've spoken to some senior staff of the CAQ, and they stress that what they fear is that their candidates take their win for granted. They don't see it that way. They're veterans, and they know that the campaign is won on the field. François Legault, I know that the CAQ doesn't want to have Éric Duhem in the way for the next 4 years. They didn't think they would have to defend their right flank, and now here they are. But nervous to lose the election or maybe lose the majority. Right now there's no way. They would have to lose seats compared to 2018, and the opposition parties are all lower than they were, except for the Conservatives. So far, no. But we'll see in a week. Perhaps it'll change.
Yeah, the debates will be interesting because Legault is going to be under attack by everybody. I don't think anybody's going to spend any time going after the other ones because they all know that they can get votes from the CAQ. Less so maybe from the other parties. So that'll be, 2 nights of just being under attack from 4 people on a stage. Hey, maybe there's a chance Legault loses his cool and something happens.
Perhaps, or you could say something stupid. Sometimes when you're tired, when you're stressed out, Legault did a few stumbles in 2018 talking about immigration laws. He was way out in left field. Voters did not hold it against him, but this time around, there's some anger at the CAQ. It's just that it's not. The CAQ voters are in. I mean, 99% approval from CAQ voters of François Legault. That's as high as you can get.
Yeah. And in a way, it's a little bit like Doug Ford, that the gaffes are part of the persona, right? That François Legault is a bit more of a plain speaker, more of the guy that you would, have at your Christmas dinner kind of thing from the family who comes along, says a couple things that are, not exactly what you'd expect. But he has that kind of persona that he's just kind of like every man from the business sector. That's how I've always thought.
a folksy person. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, okay, there is going to be lots to talk about over the next few weeks. You'll be joining me at the beginning of every week for some subscribers-only podcasts. They'll be a little bit shorter than these, but we'll go over some of the latest numbers and developments, and you'll be back at the end of the campaign for our last little tour de table, so we'll do that at the end. So, Philippe, thanks very much, and I know you got a lot on your plate, so I'll let you get back to it.
Merci beaucoup, Eric. Talk to you soon, and we'll have a great campaign, dear Quebec readers.